How much can a psychiatrist tell if a person's crazy or not? Well, that was the subject of a very famous series of experiments that was done back in the 1970s called the Rosenhan experiments. And these experiments basically turned psychiatry on its head for a while. What Dr. Rosenhan, was that he brought a bunch of people together who were not crazy at all, including himself, a painter, an architect, a carpenter, some housewives, some psychology students. And he had them make believe that they were crazy and go to psychiatric hospitals and try to get themselves admitted as schizophrenics, as manic depressives, as psychopaths. And they found an interesting result, that none of the psychiatrists on the staff of the hospital could determine that these people were really faking. They weren't psychotic, they were fakes. So after they revealed the findings of the studies to the psychiatric community, the doctor said, well, give us another chance. So Rosenhan said, sure. So they repeated the study, not with one hospital, but with 12 psychiatric hospitals. And you know, it really didn't seem to matter whether the hospitals were these real fancy hospitals for the rich, or if they were the low-budget hospitals that, the common man would go to. In all cases, they couldn't tell the difference between somebody who was pretending to hear voices, pretending to see things that weren't there, and a person who was genuinely sick. What does that tell us about the diagnostic accuracy of psychiatry? Psychiatry is a big business. It's a billion-dollar business that is very much in collusion with the psychopharmaceutical companies, the psychiatric medicines, what are called psychotropic medicines. Talking about probably the most lucrative corporate world there is. The world of pharmacology, of medicines. Most of the therapy that's recommended, probably the single most referred to type of psychotherapy by the American Psychiatric Association, the National Institute of Health, is a therapy called CBT. CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, is a therapy that is almost always given in conjunction with psychiatric medications. CBT, on the outside, seems to be pretty okay. What they're doing is really teaching people how to think in a more positive way. Who could say there's anything wrong with wanting to think in a more positive way? This sounds very, very close to what the Torah espouses, that we look more to the positive rather than to the negative. But buyer beware, consumer beware. What do the secular psychiatrists and psychologists consider to be a positive thought? And you'll find that in many cases, it's very, very different than what the Torah sanctions as good, positive, wholesome, and kosher thoughts. Another difficulty with CBT is that the belief system of the CBT practitioner is inevitably introduced into the relationship with the client, and it's also based on Stoic philosophy. This is according to a leading CBT practitioner, Aaron Beck, that the whole thing is based on philosophy and we don't adhere to any philosophies other than the Torah HaKadosh. So consumer beware. CBT and all of the other secular therapies have some truth to them, but partial truth is not the whole truth. Partial truth is not the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is the only truth that can come from God. So, don't settle for partial truths. I'm going to talk today about a method of coaching based on faith, a method of therapy based on faith that is based on the ultimate truth. And that's called Emunah coaching. Imagine you're an engineer, and your job is to come up with the mathematical calculations necessary to build a big expansion bridge. Would you be satisfied with estimates, or would you want mathematical calculations that are absolutely accurate and true and that you can count on? Because after all, if the calculations are off by just a little bit, it could have tragic consequences. It's the same thing with Emunah. The same thing with secular therapy and psychiatry. They're only partial truths, and a lot of the psychiatric or the bio-psychiatric research that's being done is yielding results that are not even true at all. For example, bio-psychiatric research has absolutely no proof at all that depression or other so-called mood disorders have a biological or genetic basis to them. There's no proof at all of that. They have some evidence that shows that people that suffer from mental illness have brains that look a little bit different than other people's brains. That's a correlation, but it's not proof that there is a mental illness in that person's brain that's causing them to act differently. Let them study the brains of Nobel Prize winners, or even better yet, of spiritual masters, and I'm sure they'll certainly find that their brains look different also. They have absolutely no evidence as well that the psychiatric medications that they are giving are what is actually making people feel better. So you see, we need to be on guard. I'll tell you myself, as on a personal level, that before on my way to becoming a religious person, I went through 40 years almost of what I call traveling in the therapeutic wasteland. Just like the Jews traveled for 40 years in the desert, in the midbar, in the wilderness, I myself was on a personal journey looking for good therapies, looking for something I could believe in as a psychotherapist, as a person who's licensed to do psychotherapy in America, in Israel. I started with psychoanalysis, Freudian psychoanalysis. It was fascinating to me, particularly because my mother had been a Freudian analyst. I grew up with that stuff. I sort of believed in it, sort of like one would believe in a religion. Freud was a brilliant scientist. He was a brilliant theoretician. And, of course, my mother, recommended that this would be a good thing for me. So, out of respect for her, I pursued it. I was interested in it. I studied in the psychoanalytic, I achieved a doctoral degree in psychology, and I studied in a postdoctoral psychoanalytic institute for 4 years. During the time that I was in that psychoanalytic institute training program, I was required to undergo a personal psychoanalysis myself, which means that I had to lie on a couch 4 times a week, and I did this for 9 years. And I spoke to an analyst who I can't even tell you to this day what she looks like, because she sat behind me. And anytime I wanted to make any kind of emotional connection to the analyst, I was told that I could not. That's a violation of the procedure. And that's a sign of resistance, that you're not cooperating with the psychoanalyst. I learned a lot about myself in psychoanalysis. I probably know more about myself and more about my unconscious than most people do. But it didn't really do me much good. Because after 9 years, I really can't say that I was any happier than I was before. In fact, after those 9 years, it took me almost another 20 years to get a lot of this analytic theory out of my mind, the theory which I had been indoctrinated into, which was based on very unclean sources, and was just as completely not true and not fair to impose upon a person. After I had my jaunt into psychoanalysis, I decided that I would try CBT. As I said, CBT is much less of a problem. The sources are, are not as, it's pretty clean in a way. But again, it was emphasizing positive thinking. And the truth is that not everything is positive. Ultimately, we need to get through some of the negatives to be able to see that everything ultimately is positive, that everything that God does is for the best. But if I keep looking at the garden and I say there are no weeds here, there are no weeds here, it's just flowers, no weeds, no weeds, I'm fooling myself. There are plenty of weeds there, and those weeds need to be taken out and removed before I can really appreciate the flowers. So my CBT therapy didn't last very long. From there, I decided I would go, into hypnosis. Hypnosis had a great appeal to me because the idea of being able to input ideas into a person's mind, into their unconscious mind, and the speed at which hypnosis seemed to work, especially the stage form of hypnosis, was very appealing, very compelling. But I soon discovered that even when a person would go into a deep hypnotic state, that the mind is not a passive recipient of suggestions that are given to it from somebody from the outside. The unconscious mind is dynamic, and the defense mechanisms, they continue regardless of whether somebody's in hypnosis or not. They may go into temporary abeyance for a while because in hypnosis a person's relaxed and they're less analytical to begin with. But after the hypnosis is over, those defense mechanisms come back. And what happens is they repel and they throw out all of those hypnotic suggestions, because those suggestions are not things that the person came to himself. They were imposed upon him suddenly from the outside. It's sort of like, when a germ enters the body, and the body can immediately tell that this germ is a foreign invader. And the body's immune system does everything it can to take that germ and expel it out of the body as quickly as possible. And that's really the same thing that happened with the hypnotic suggestions. They were expelled from the system because they were recognized as foreign invaders. It wasn't respectful to the body. It wasn't respectful to the unconscious to be bombarded with all these positive suggestions that didn't make sense to the unconscious of the person, because the unconscious person's fears and anxieties hadn't been removed at all, hadn't been worked out, hadn't been resolved. It was disrespectful. So I abandoned hypnosis, what's called classical hypnosis, the idea that the mind is passive and doesn't have a mind of its own. From there, I moved into what's called Ericksonian hypnosis. That had much more sophistication to it, or at least I thought, because Dr. Milton Erickson, who some people believe is the world's foremost authority on clinical hypnosis, he didn't think that the mind was passive at all. He recognized the dynamic function of the mind and that there were defense mechanisms and so on. And people resisted change until it makes sense to them. Erickson said that the unconscious mind was the seat of a person's creativity. And that was very appealing to me. It was wonderful to think that I had creativity and I had intelligence that I wasn't even aware of, that's residing in the unconscious mind. And all one needed to do was to go into hypnosis and access that unconscious creativity, bring it out, and integrate it into your current present life, into your current functioning. And you could be an amazing, creative, healthy, dynamic, and alive person. A well-integrated person. It had great appeal. Not only to me, but to thousands and thousands of other people that became excited about Ericksonian hypnosis, Ericksonian psychotherapy. Unfortunately, that too fell far short from the promises that it made. Because once a person comes out of hypnosis, even Ericksonian hypnosis, the creativity is that's revealed is very interesting, it's very nice. But as a patient, as someone who was going for Ericksonian hypnotherapy, I can tell you, it didn't alter my basic way of looking at the world. It didn't take away the free-floating anxieties and the existential doubts that I had. And why was that? Because the existential doubts that people have, the doubts that gnaw at them, the anxieties that trouble them deep down, they don't go away unless one comes to understand that it's part of every person. It's part of every person's soul to want to be created, want to be connected to the Creator. Everybody deep down recognizes that there is a Creator. And they recognize that they are a creation, not a creator. And they want to be in more of an intimate connection with that Creator and live in alignment with that basic truth. Deep down, everybody has a spirituality that wants them to be able to connect with the Creator and that's the only thing that gives anybody any kind of permanent or lasting relief from anxiety, from fear, from worry, from sadness and depression. So, of course, Ericksonian hypnosis could not fill the bill. From there, I went off to all kinds of things. I tried primal scream therapy. That was a therapy that, when you go into a soundproof room and the primal scream therapist gives you a baseball bat or he gives you a tennis racket and he tells you that you should smash, you should bang it against the pillow, or you should hit something, or scream at the top of your lungs and ventilate all your emotions. It seemed like, something worth trying, because it seemed to be, people say it works fast, right? So you go into the padded room, and you scream at the top of your lungs, and you let out all of your anger, and you bang away with the bats and the tennis rackets, and you feel great. You leave there and you feel, wow, you feel like so good, so clean, so relieved, and it lasts a couple of days and then it's gone. And then, you're back to where you started. Nothing was resolved because the mind isn't so simple that we can just ventilate and go through what's called a catharsis, a release, a ventilation of emotion, and that's enough, If that would be enough, a person could go just kick a tree or throw something and feel better. We know people punch the walls, they throw things. They feel better for a moment, but it doesn't solve any problems. Then there's something called paradoxical psychotherapy. I couldn't take that seriously at all. That's sort of what's called reverse psychology. That's where you tell somebody who's coming to you who wants to have less anxiety, you tell them, I think for a while you're going to feel more anxiety. You go the reverse of what they're actually experiencing or what they're actually asking for. You sort of prescribe the symptom. Couldn't take that seriously. I don't think most intelligent people can. Basically, there was a time where I tried family psychotherapy. That was interesting. I sat with the family therapist on the couch, and he drew what's called a genogram. That's a pictorial view of your family, not just currently, but back through several generations, as far back as you can remember. It's called a family tree. And the idea of the family therapy was that there's generational problems that exist in the family, and they get passed down to the next generation, to subsequent generations. And the therapist hypothesized that I was reliving a problem that existed in somebody in my family 2 generations ago. Of course, he has no evidence to support that idea, and it was a totally unproductive effort on my part to get better from that type of a therapy. The problems that I was seeking to deal with in myself were not unusually excessive problems. They're the problems that most people struggle with: self-esteem, some anxiety, some feelings of competitiveness with other people. What we call normal, everyday, neurotic, household neurotic types of problems. And so I saw that it wasn't helpful. I decided, after being so discouraged with all of this, all the money I was spending on therapy and all the time I was spending on these psychotherapies, I decided that I would give psychoanalysis one more try. But this time, instead of the Freudian version, I decided I would use an interpersonal psychoanalyst. This is an analyst who believes that the relationship, his or her relationship with the client, is what helps the client the most. What's going to cure the client is having a healthy relationship with a guy or a woman who has a PhD in psychology, who is a so-called healthy person. And through having what's called a corrective emotional experience with this healthy psychoanalyst, I was supposed to become healthy myself. Well, again, how do you know that the psychoanalyst is healthy? And what's the definition of health? So, obviously, it didn't work. Okay. Ultimately, I reached a turning point in my career, and this was about, almost 20 years ago, where I saw something written in the book called Derech Hashem. In Derech Hashem, in the Way of God, the Ramchal, who was a Jewish rabbi who wrote about 600 years ago, he wrote in the introduction to that book that only treatments, only ideas that would be used to develop treatments from the Torah, from the Holy Torah, could completely alleviate and cure human suffering. That human suffering could be made to feel better, could be eased by some of the therapies that I've been talking to you about. This is what it means. But none of the therapies that are based on partial truths and are not based on the Torah, which is God's laws, God's way for us to live, his ideas, given to Moses, the greatest prophet that ever lived, on Mount Sinai, and passed down through generations. Nothing could go to the root of a person's problems except if it came from the Torah. That sort of piqued my curiosity. In other words, these other books, they had partial truths, they had some value, they had some accuracy to them, but they were never going to reach deep enough to cure the soul of a person who's suffering. Very interesting idea. What I thought was the difference between this book called the Torah and all of these other books? And the Ramchal answered my question. He said, there's only one difference between the Torah and these other books, and that is that the Torah, God put his special influence onto, and he didn't put his special influence onto these other books. And if God had not said the Torah is holy, then it would just be another book, like all of these other books. So from there, I became very, very interested in how I could use the Torah, God's book, to be able to help people in my practice. How I could use God's book and be loyal and committed to only using what I could find in God's book that would be able to help people, and many of the people who I was not able to help with these other methods. The main method that I was trained in being psychoanalytic therapy was not able to help many of the people that were coming to me. And it was very frustrating for me as a therapist. So basically, I started to get interested. I started to see that some of the root causes of the psychological symptoms that I was seeing in people were based on things that I never read about in the secular psychological literature. For example, people have this great deep feeling of uncertainty. We're living in a world that I think you'll agree is a very uncertain place. And people want to have a feeling of being certain in a place that's very, very uncertain. How does one do that? Well, the secular approach is to ignore the fact that the world is uncertain. The secular approach is to just give the person a lot of encouragement and belief that if they just keep plugging along and they keep analyzing themselves, or they keep pumping all kinds of positive messages into themselves, that they're going to be able to deal with this uncertain world where good things seem to happen sometimes to not such good people, and bad things seem to happen to good people, seemingly bad things. So our approach, a faith-based approach, looks at this in a very different way. We acknowledge that there is an uncertainty to the world because the world is not in our hands to control. We can't control the weather. We can't control the economy. We can't control other people's opinions of us. We can't control the behavior of other people. These things are out of our control. So we humble ourselves, we admit that all of these things are being controlled by God, and that we have no way to be able to affect them, no matter how strong our will is. A husband can't change his wife. A wife can't change her kids. We can't force people to be different than they are. We can learn to influence them by using wisdom, and we teach wisdom. But by accepting and learning that we can't change or dominate over conditions and circumstances that are out of our control, we arm people with the greatest blueprint for living life, the greatest template that you can install in your mind for a happy life. And that is what's talked about in a holy book called Pirkei Avos. And there's one teaching there that says, pray that your will, that God's will become your will. What does it mean to make God's will your will? And then your will become God's will. And then the will of others people will become your will. What does this mean? It means that if your blueprint for life is all-inclusive, in other words, if you take God into consideration and what God's will is, and that you have the flexibility now that Emunah-based coaching or faith-based coaching gives one, now you have the ability to fit yourself in to whatever circumstances God is sending at you, whatever tests or difficulties. And you learn to see them as opportunities, not as something that you battle against, that you go against, but opportunities to be able to fit yourself into in the best possible way, to accept and work with. And then God makes your will His will. He sees that you passed the test, and He sees that now there's no reason to test you anymore. And if what your will is, what you want, is something that's normal and reasonable, and something that God has no reason to deny you, no reason to want to deny you, He gives it to you, free and clear, as a free gift. That's how we deal with the uncertainty of life. The secular theories, the scientists that study behavioral science, study people, they don't differentiate between the mind of a person who has faith in a creator, and the mind of a person who doesn't have faith in Creator. They don't distinguish or differentiate between those two different types of minds. And a mind with faith sees the world very differently than a mind without faith. A mind that has faith, as I said, looks at the world as being functioning on divine providence. That means that everything, literally everything that's happening, he sees as being orchestrated from above, orchestrated from a higher power, from a Creator. And he knows that whatever's happening has some meaning, has some purpose. He understands that suffering as well has a purpose. It hurts, it's painful. The person of faith feels no less pain, but he can quickly turn that pain into a purpose and a meaning that in a sense lessens that pain right away. It helps him to understand that there's a message for him in the difficulties that are going on in his life. So, cognitive dissonance is a psychological concept, probably one of the most highly studied things in social psychology. Cognitive dissonance is just a fancy way of saying doubts. A person who has dissonance, has conflict in his mind, is in a state of doubt. Well, we have ways of getting people out of doubt, right? Because the reason that they're in doubt, what is it that this takes a person away from? All of these therapies take a person away from their certainty, their belief in the Creator, right? Anything that's secular that will take a person away from the Creator is obviously putting their faith in something that is not the Creator, that didn't come from the Creator, or partially came from the Creator, but not completely. And it weakens a person's doubt about the Creator himself. And that goes against, as we said, human nature, because it's human nature to want to connect with the Creator. It's human nature to want to understand and know more about the Creator. It's human nature to want to live in a bond, in a connection all day long, breath by breath, with the Creator. That's human nature. That's everybody has that desire, that yearning. So that is another reason that all of these therapies take people away from the Creator, weaken the bond, and that causes doubt. It causes a deep, gnawing doubt and anxiety. You know, there's another psychology called existential psychology. Existential psychologists, you know, they talk about the problem of existence. They talk about that existence is very painful and difficult for the human being. How can a person deal with existence, right? They're talking about how do you deal with an existence where there's no God? Because there's no God in existential psychology. So they're saying, how do you cope? How does a person cope with the idea that someday they're going to die? How does a person cope with all of the choices that you have in life? How do you know what choices to make? How do you know what are the right choices for you? Where do you get the wisdom and the peace of mind and security to know that you're making the right choices and that you're using your life in the right way and that you're living your life in the right way? How does a person know that when he gets to the end of his life, that he'll feel as though he had a good life, that he'll feel that satisfaction and fulfillment, or instead of feeling a deep sense of regret, you know? A person doesn't know when his last day is going to come. That's the uncertainty that's built, the basic uncertainty, the basic doubt that's built into everybody's life. So these are the problems of existence. These are the basic, fundamental problems that existential psychology studies. The problem of how do you exist? These are gnawing existential concerns, existential problems that don't go away, that every human being experiences as soon as his brain develops to the point where he understands what's going on. He has some connection to reality. The human being understands, unlike the animals, that his time in this world is limited, and that ultimately he's going to have to leave this place. This being the central fact of a human being's existence, he needs some way of being able to deal with this fact. He needs something that will give him solace, that will be soothing to his soul, that will give him some certainty and security and a way of moving forward in spite, to be able to resolve this deep anxiety. Really, what is an anxiety of death, a death anxiety. And many people who don't believe that they're afraid of dying, who deny the fact that they're afraid of dying, really, really are. And they're in denial of it. And they're just running around like gerbils on a wheel, trying to stay as busy as they can, jumping from one activity to another, from the internet to the cell phones and back to the iPads and the television set, and racing to make more and more money on that escalating treadmill, going. And a lot of this hyperactivity that we see amongst people today. People who can't sit still, people who can't stop themselves. They always need to keep busy. A lot of this is that they're running away and trying to keep away, ward away the unconscious gnawing concerns that who knows when life will end. Who knows when it will all come to an end. And after all is said and done, what was the meaning of one's life? What was it all about? Well, we have ways of helping people to deal with this deep gnawing anxiety. We have ways of people, because the basic anxiety that people have is that they're dying. And that's not true. There's no such thing as death. That's also a false concept. There's only a death to the body, and the body was never alive to begin with. The body came from the earth, it returns to the earth. But before the soul, which is alive, came into the body couldn't do anything. And when the person leaves the body can't do anything then either. Because the soul goes on ultimately to heaven and to another body, to a perfected body, which comes later on. And the holy rabbis, they write about something about that body and what it looks like. It's sort of a body of glass, so to speak. Nobody knows really for sure what it looks like. But it's a perfected, purified body. A body that will be unable to be impure ever again and lives forever. So there's no such thing as death. There is a world to come. There is another life. There is another body that people get. But people don't get this explanation. Now, when a person is first told some of these ideas, it takes a time before these ideas become internalized in a person, and a person can start to feel very calm and very good as a result of the knowledge that they're gaining, the spiritual knowledge that they're gaining. But once they gain that knowledge, and once they develop a relationship with Hashem, with God, and once they have strategies and tools that they can use to be able to deal with the adversity of life and deal with the difficulties of their lives, then they have something that they can use forever and that they can teach to their children and their grandchildren. One of the most limiting things, most limiting beliefs, another falsehood, is that people need all kinds of things. They need to buy things and have things and own all kinds of material things that they don't really need. Why do they buy them? Why do they want them? Because they want to have that sense of comfort. They want to ease that deep anxiety that really everything is not okay. That really it's a very scary existence. Really, we don't know what's going to happen from one moment to another. The political climate, the international climate, the nuclear situation, it brings out deep anxieties in people, and they have to deal with them in one way or another. If they don't have healthy, spiritual, good ways of dealing with those things, then they have to turn to all kinds of other machinations, all other types of ways of being able to soothe that primal anxiety, that deep anxiety. So they need to buy things. They need to surround themselves with comfort. And they need to feel that they can control life by buying more stuff and having more stuff. It gives a person the illusion that they're in control, that they can regulate, the quality of their lives. It gives them, it's like putting a Band-Aid on the issue. If I possess things, if I have possessions, if I have money that I can control, I can influence my life in some major way. I can influence other people in some major way. I can satisfy myself. I can fulfill my own desires without God, without turning to spirituality. It's a delusion. It's a false belief. It doesn't really soothe that existential anxiety, that deep gnawing uncertainty that people have. People have nothing to believe in if they believe that the philosophy and the psychology that the secular world offers them is true. According to them, a person is basically going to have to believe that he's always going to be essentially what he is. He's always, biography is destiny. That if you were born into you were born into tough circumstances and you developed into a tough type of a person with a problem, that it's pretty hard to get rid of that problem, Or if you have a certain level of intelligence, well, that's just basically who you're going to be. You're always going to be a person with lower intelligence or average intelligence. So a person believes that whoever they are is what they're going to be, but we don't believe. A person of faith doesn't believe that at all. That's really a lack of faith, that a person can't grow. It's a lack of a growth mindset to believe that a person is always going to be what he is, or what he was. This is a very, deterministic way of thinking. We think that a person can always change. Why? Because a person who has connection with God is connected to a world of infinite possibilities. After all, God is the infinite resource. He's got all the resources. He's got everything. And God, we believe, can alter nature. And we are a part of nature. So God can do anything. He can move his little finger, so to speak, in heaven, and he can make a person new. He can make you new. He can elevate you. He can elevate your personality to a level that you never thought was possible. And you can function at a level and do things and accomplish things that nobody ever thought that you could. And that goes for many of the psychiatric diagnoses. People that get a very poor, what's called a poor prognosis. That means they're told that, or the family is told, your loved one is schizophrenic. He's going to pretty much always be that way. We don't really have a cure for it. Maybe we can manage it with medication, or maybe he needs to live in a residence or a psychiatric facility. So he's not going to be dangerous to himself or to other people. Or if a person has a severe mood disorder, what they call a mood disorder, what they think is a depression that's caused by biology or chemical imbalance, person is told, look, you need to be on medicine for the rest of your life. The doctor may even say, listen, I suffer from the same problem. I have bipolar disorder also, manic depressive illness. Be like me, take meds for the rest of your life, and just live with it. But a person with faith knows that when you're connected with God, you're connected with infinite possibilities. You're connected with a world of resources that goes beyond what's natural. You're connected to something that's above natural law. You're connected to supernatural law, if you will. And that's why we see, by utilizing God's book, utilizing the Torah, to help people even with severe psychiatric difficulties, that these things alleviate. In situations where for more than 30 years, I never saw them alleviate. And I've seen miracles. I've seen tremendous miracles in these types of cases that are so severe, so difficult for regular doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists to treat. So, Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to continue with this. We're going to continue next week to tell you about really the best strategies for dealing with the gnawing anxieties and difficulties of life, We're going to really tell you more about what all this means. But right now, if you have any questions, we'd like you to call us. Because we have a toll-free number that you can call from anywhere in the world. It's 1-718-577-2975. If you call 1-718-577-2975, and you call anytime between 2 in the afternoon and 11 o'clock at night, Israel time, just push 1, extension 1, and speak to our secretary, Aaron. And he can set you up with a consultation to speak with myself or with our female Emunah coach. He can give you any information on any of the Emunah therapy or Emunah coaching services that we have, our books, our programs, how you can also yourself become a certified professional Emunah coach, a faith-based coach. He can send you information. He can set you up with a consult right away. Call that number if you need any help yourself or anyone you know, any loved one that you have needs immediate help. Call us. 1-718-577-2975, extension 1, Aaron. You should all be blessed to have everything you need. You should have all of the money you need. You should have all of the health you need. You should have great marriages. You should have wonderful relationships with your children, peaceful relationships. And most of all, you should be blessed with faith. Faith in the one true God, and to be able to develop a relationship with Him. And the merit of that, we should all soon see the coming of the true Messiah, the building of the third and finally holy temple in Jerusalem down the street. We should see it soon in our days. Amen.